Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Is it? Right now? Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial said correctly, too. USA Prepares. And we're delighted you're here. Nathan's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Captain John Regan's with us. Welcome, Captain John Regan.
Good morning, Vincent.
I don't know if you heard that, but I was chatting with Nathan, and I said, he said, we're about ready to go live or on the air. And I said, do we have to? He said, well, we were discussing it. And I said, well, let's talk about it. and we were on the air. So I don't know if you all heard that, but yeah, we were just kind of having a little bit of pre-broadcast fun. So, class, if you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. So, John, did you have a chance to see the alleged debate?
No, I spared myself that ordeal.
You know what? That sounds like Norm Shealy. He did. Well, he doesn't want to do it either, and a lot of us don't want to do it. And my wife said to me, I was on the phone with one of our instructors. I was on with Joey, and my wife said, "Well, the debate's already, into 15 minutes. Did you want to watch it?" And I said, "Yeah, I kind of need to do that." So I watched it, and what I noticed, I just want to give my brief take on this. One of the things that Hillary was talking about was the gun show loophole. She wants to close the gun show loophole. Well, what the heck is the gun show loophole? It is like, it's the equivalent of a flea market, and we'll call it a gun show, and people bring their items to sell, and others come to buy. And let's say someone has a refrigerator, and you walk up to that person and you say, are you selling that refrigerator? And they go, yeah, that's why I brought it. How much would you like for it? $100. Okay. $100. Is that price firm? Well, tell you what, I'll take 80. Okay. All right. Does it work? Yeah, it works great. Okay. I'd like to buy that. I've got my pickup truck. Can I buy it right now? Sure. Now, that's what happens at a flea market. Now, at a gun show, and by the way, that's some guy selling his personal property, a refrigerator, complete with Freon, allegedly a dangerous substance, a refrigerant called Freon. Okay, so at a gun show, there are vendors who are selling new guns, new ammunition, new tools, and then there are also people that sell used guns, used equipment, new ammo, but they're dealers. So those who sell new guns are dealers, and those who sell used guns are dealers. And if you want to buy a new gun from them, they will contact the feds and make sure that a background check is done, and make sure that you pass it, and you fill out the paperwork, and you get your gun. Well, there are other people who walk in, and they may walk in carrying a rifle or a pistol or a shotgun or several. Some will even want to sell their entire collection, and they'll have them in a little hand truck or a little cart, and there'll be a little flag sticking out of the barrel of one of the rifles that says for sale. It may have the price and may not. Well, this is some guy selling his private property. He may have inherited them. And he may decide that, he needs the money, or he doesn't want them. Or he wants to get rid of a 30-30 and put that money into something else. So you'll see signs that say for trade, for sale. And this is a situation where people sell private property. They just happen to be guns. They own them, and they want to sell them. And they go to a swap meet or a flea market for guns, and that's where it happens. Now, Hillary wants to close that. She wants to shut down that gun show loophole where private individuals are selling their personal property to other private individuals. I have a problem with that. Because what if I have a collection and I decide that I want to liquidate some or all of it? Well, how am I going to do it? Do I have to go to a dealer? What it really means is the government wants to know who has what guns, as well as other things like automobiles and trucks and all kinds of things the government wants us to register. They want to know what our health is as well. They want to be in our business. So Hillary wants to close that gun show loophole, and she said so again last night. Hillary is a person who interrupted Donald Trump. It was out of order. Now, he interrupted her, but not as much. What I noticed about Donald Trump is he was less specific with the numbers and the statistics. Hillary, could quote them chapter and verse, so she appeared to be more on her game than Donald Trump. However, she was on the attack. Hillary says that Muslims want to be part of America. They want to be wanted. And that's okay. It's okay with me if they want to be wanted. Then if they want to be wanted, they need to look, act, speak, and dress like we do, if they're here in our country. They want to be wanted. So they need to act like they want to be wanted, if that's true. Hillary Clinton wants more refugees. She said so. And she said we need to do our part. Europe's doing its part. We need to do our part. What's our part? What is our part? Is our part to let anyone and everyone who wants to come here, come here? Is that our part? I don't think so. And she talked about something else. And that is the Trump effect. The Trump effect. And she said Trump effect is akin to, well, bullying is up. Pushing people around is up. Beating people is up. That's the Trump effect. Really? That's the Trump effect? So Trump is going around with clubs and guns and knives and he's stabbing people? And so that's the image of the Trump effect? Hillary's out of order. Absolutely out of order. She's a national disgrace. She's an intergalactic disgrace. She's right up there with Barry, in my opinion. And what really concerns me is the lie after lie after lie after lie. She doesn't know how to tell the truth, in my opinion. And I can't believe we got to this point where this is what we're facing as a potential presidential candidate. She may even win. Larry Nichols said she will be president. He said it months and months and months and months ago when there was no chance she would even get this far. And now we're looking at that voice, that tone, that evil, that bisexual being in the White House, the commander-in-chief. Think about that. Think about that. It's whatever she has to do to win. She's a formidable candidate. But, this locker room talk about Donald Trump? Do you think that was arranged? Do you think that he was set up? Do you think that maybe this trolling for, hey, we're looking for dirt on Donald Trump. Anybody got some? Because we're willing to pay big bucks. Those would be her supporters paying out big bucks for dirt on Donald Trump. This is a disgrace. It's a disgrace. Well, I don't think what Donald Trump said, if he said it, is all that nice. But it's nothing compared to the actions of Bill Clinton. You have to remember that Bill Clinton got a lot of people killed. Hillary Clinton got a lot of people killed. I call that war. Has Donald Trump gotten anybody killed? None that I know of. John Regan, those are just my thoughts on the alleged debates of last night. Oh, by the way, at the end of the debate, the alleged debate, Donald Trump walked up to Hillary Clinton to shake her hand. He walked up to her, not the other way around. They didn't meet in the middle. One other thing, there were no smiles. I watched the faces of Donald Trump and those who met with him right after the debate. And Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had to look around for somebody to find to talk to. She had to walk to them. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine Hillary Clinton, a presidential candidate, looking for a job, had to go find somebody to talk to after the debate? There were no smiles on the Clinton side, no smiles on the Trump side. But according to Drudge, the debate was won by Donald Trump. And I agree with that. Those are my comments. John Regan?
Well, I've been looking at the stops both these candidates have made, and we see pictures where Hillary's lucky to draw a few people, and Trump has these huge crowds. And if it weren't for the multiple oversampling of Democrats, this race wouldn't be as close as they present.
Okay, and Hillary's talking about Donald Trump taking losses and using losses, carrying them forward on his income tax returns, his corporate returns. Who hasn't done that? Who hasn't? I mean, it's in the tax code. It's literally there. You can do it. So he does it, and then she beats him up and says, hey, you haven't been paying for education. You haven't been paying for the military, as if that's a bad thing. If I had a choice right now to pay for education the way it is in our hamlet in Missouri, I would say no. As a matter of fact, I felt so bad about how education is in our little hamlet of Missouri, I ran for school board office, and I announced I would fire the superintendent. That's how bad education is here. And military, I've said publicly, if you see a recruiter on a high school campus, throw him out. Throw him out. Tell him to get out of here because you don't want your son or daughter killed, maimed, or wounded. So how do I feel about contributing tax money to the military? Absolutely not. We'll be right back. And another thing. I didn't see Donald Trump sit down, but Hillary Clinton, I saw her leaning against her high stool. I saw her leaning against it. There are images of her on the internet sitting down. Donald Trump stood for the entire alleged debate. At least that's what I saw. John Regan, so you've got class for us. I'm looking at thefinancialstateoftheunion.com, resources at the news tab for today. Great lesson plan.
Let's start with the preparedness section, and that gets into the other big news of the weekend. Hurricane Matthew, which I've never seen a hurricane do what Matthew did. It came up, it started hugging the Florida coast, right around Palm Beach. And, when you're driving that going north to South Florida, that's a long way. East-west is pretty quick, but that north-south distance, that's a long trip up the coast, on into Georgia and South Carolina and even part of North Carolina. I've been watching hurricanes since I can remember because I grew up in Southeast Texas. Hurricanes would head our way during hurricane season, and fortunately, while I lived there, we never had a direct hit. But I've never seen a hurricane just hug the coast. I've seen it, strike. I've seen it do all kinds of weird things. But to hug the coastline for that long, whether it's natural or artificial, doesn't really matter. That's just, expanding the disaster area so much more than what you'd normally see. Normally, you'd have that storm surge and wind damage along the coastal area, and then what really causes the damage is the rain that gets dropped in the interior of wherever it went in. And here we've got that storm going, through all those states on the coastline, and at the same time, it's dumping, many cases, more than 10 inches of rain into probably up to around 100 miles inland. And the first link I've entitled "It Doesn't Change," and the headline in the article: "Stranded residents, we regret riding out Hurricane Matthew." And unfortunately, I've seen this bit of news over and over. People don't take the hurricane warnings seriously. They stay put. They think they can ride it out. And then if they manage to live through it, this is what we get. We wish we would have gone. And
Sure.
Unfortunately, I think that's what we see in so many areas of preparedness. You can't get people to take the warning seriously. And, if they're lucky enough to live, they wish they had of.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, John, there was some price gouging. What kind of price gouging? Well, plywood. Plywood went up in price. There are thousands of complaints now about hotel rooms going up, like doubling or almost doubling. Price of gas went up a little bit. Gasoline in Missouri went up 3.5% as the hurricane was approaching. I mean, overnight it went up, and I thought that was going to happen. So while I was on the air, I asked our son to get some gasoline for our equipment, and so he was able to load up the gas-powered vehicles and get some gas for the smaller gasoline-powered things like chainsaws and so forth. And as winter's getting closer, we are cutting down the trees. Not cutting down the trees. We're cutting up the trees that have fallen down for additional firewood for the winter. We think it's going to be a rough winter, John, and we're not the only ones. Some of our instructors across the pond believe that the same thing is going to happen there as well. Captain John Regan's with us. We are at the financialstateoftheunion.com. And if you'd like to follow along in class, please click on the news tab. We'll be right back. Captain John Regan's with us. John, I'm ready if you are.
You only think you're ready.
More good news.
Let's jump down to the third one under preparedness, more of the usual. This is also about Hurricane Matthew. It's one of the articles that Daily Mail has posted. So if you have not seen pictures of the hurricane and its aftermath, this is a decent article to go to. And one of the pictures I want to point out is the evacuation photos, where you see these long lines of cars going nowhere fast. Now, you think rush hour is bad. Evacuation traffic is many times worse. And that isn't even all the people. This is more, the coastline part of these areas. When you think about the disasters we talk about with the, grid down, no supply chain, if people wanted to evacuate out of the cities, you're talking about an even larger volume than this. That's if the cars worked. And then while you have gasoline and you think this is bad, think about having all cars spread all over the place that no longer have gasoline. So you you can't really do your normal highway driving, because you're pretty much assuming when you're driving that there's no car stopped, and even at that, it's a rarity when you come upon one. Well, when you have all these cars either no longer working because of electronics or gasoline, it becomes an obstacle course, and eventually some of them get pushed out of the way. But it's not normal, and I think that's one of the problems we have, is that it's very hard to put yourself into situations that you've never experienced before. And this is one of those where, just try to imagine that traffic a little bit. It's also like, the video I pointed out with Frontier House, one of the PBS shows. It's not the same as living it, but they put a 21st century family back in the 1860s. And even with giving the tools and coaching, they still had a very rough time. And on the final report, really none of them would have made it through the winter, because none of them cut enough firewood. And
John, I'm looking at this picture, and the caption says it's 2 lanes, and there's tractor trailers, and there's mostly cars, but there are a couple pickup trucks in there and SUVs, mostly cars. And it says traffic as far as the eyes can see. Thousands of families have been caught in gridlock across the state, and this would be Florida, up the East Coast into the Carolinas and Georgia as they flee their homes ahead of the storm, while the National Guard trucks drive toward the evacuation zones to assist. Now, one of the things that we do here is we make sure that all of our cars, trucks, have at least, and I'm talking about our family, at least 1/2 of a tank of fuel, minimum. When it gets to a half a tank, we consider that empty. So the reason for that is if we ever get caught in one of these things, we have at least a half a tank. And think about that. So on the way home, class, on the way home from work, if you look at your tank, you go, geez, I only have a 1/4 of a tank. What would happen if you got caught in an accident? Maybe you're not in the accident, but, it's gridlock, while a helicopter comes to rescue and so forth. And you could be there. And let's say it's the sweltering heat of the summer or the freezing cold of the winter, and you want to keep your engine idling. And then all these vehicles in front of you, what does their gas gauge show? And what is their likelihood of running out of gas? That's just one thought. I'd like to read something, John. It's sort of tangentially applies to what we're talking about. So what about the roadworthiness of vehicles? Over the weekend, I wanted to buy some items for some of our farm equipment. And I was looking at serpentine belts. And those are these, we'll call them fan belts on vehicles from, let's say, the 90s to today. They didn't use the V belts, but they had these serpentine belts. They have multiple ribbed Vs in the belt. And I was looking, and there was one that was less expensive. And this was on the internet. And it says, RoadMax is an economically priced belt for the do-it-yourself consumer, manufactured for high-mileage applications that do not require the performance demands and service of life of original equipment construction. Not intended for severe driving, high-performance, or heavy-duty applications. So what this sounds like to me is a light-duty belt. Now, how many people who buy or have their cars worked on get these, we'll call them substandard or inferior serpentine belts installed? And what is the likelihood that they're going to fail, when they get hot? Well, probably higher than an original equipment quality belt. So now what we're seeing is substandard parts being sold on the internet. And this is just one example. So the car in front of you may have this, or the car in front of the car in front of you may have this, or parts like this. And that's if they notice and they put a belt on, before it fails. What about how many vehicles fail on the road? We know a guy, our son, got an email from one of his high school friends. He's probably in his mid-20s now. And his constant velocity axle shaft broke. on a Dodge truck, and it was flopping around under the hood. Serious failure. That happens. So beware. You may not be able to get out of a situation that John Regan has been talking about because of some guy who's ill-prepared in front of you, which you cannot control. So make sure you have several routes to get to where you want to go. And be prepared to cross that grass line that's illegal. Be prepared to do that. Because to save someone's life, including your own, you may need to do that. That is if they haven't put up the cheese graters. Back to you, John.
And if it is the grid down, no supply chain situation, where are you going to go to anyway? Everybody's in the same situation. I want to bring up the middle item disaster list. This is a list of natural disasters by death toll, and it breaks it down in a number of ways. The first table is the 10 worst natural disasters. The first two are the only ones where the death tolls were over 1 million people, and even the second one's questionable. The range is from 900,000 to 2 million. So it's somewhere between 1.9 million and 6 million people died as a result of floods in China in 1887 and 1931. When we look down the list, it's basically China, India, Pakistan area for the top 9. Number 10 is kind of unique. It was from 526, so it's the oldest one listed, and it was about 250,000, maybe 300,000 people from an earthquake in what is now known as Turkey. So you look at that being the top 10 list. When I say that the preparedness that we mostly hear about is for small disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes, and here floods as well. It really is, because the deadliest of these, 1 to 4 million people, is nothing compared to just the United States. In a grid down situation, you're talking about over 300 million people dying. And it's like I say, it's going to be the biggest ready or not party. Whatever you have, that's what you've got. And that includes the people you surround yourself with.
John, I'd like to address that, if I may. It's a little off topic. Yesterday afternoon, it was toward the end of the afternoon, I was talking to one of our friends who has a farm across the road, and he mentioned that he has this pickup truck, this Chevy pickup truck, and he was going to have trouble getting it started because it hadn't run in several years, and it was left outside. So I said, well, I'll go over there. I'll see if I can get it started, and I'll bring it over to our place, and I'll put it up on a lift and take a look and see what it's going to need to get this thing running. And this is a full-size Chevy pickup truck. So, by the way, class, if you're in a situation like that and you have a carbureted engine and you're trying to get it started for the first time and you've checked all the fluids, you've checked the radiator to make sure it has fluid in it and topped off, and you check the automatic transmission, you check the power steering reservoir, and all the fluids are up, or if they're not up, bring them up to where they should be before you try to start it. And what I did was I poured some gasoline, took the air cleaner off, and poured about an ounce of gasoline down the carburetor throat. And the reason was because there was no fuel in the carburetor. So instead of cranking, I just was able to start it right away. By the way, I took the battery out of it, brought it home to our farm, charged it up, and then I wanted to have a full charge before I tried starting it. Started right up. And then I could see through the fuel filter that the carburetor, or the fuel pump, was pumping, and fuel was flowing to the carburetor. So all was good. So while we're doing this, Mrs. Finelli decided she would come out across the road with me, and my son was there, and so everything was good. And we decided if we weren't successful, we're going to just tow it back to our place and with a strap and work on it at our place. Well, Mrs. Finelli noticed while I was working on the truck that there were a bunch of people on the road, maybe 500, 600 feet away. And that's where a car had overturned yesterday morning. And we saw the car on the roof in a ditch. And the ditches are about, a foot and a half deep. What it is the road. Our road in front of our farm is just dirt, and there are these ditches. And it's easy for a car to slip into the ditch. And this one slipped into the ditch and flipped over. I guess everybody's fine. The sheriff's office painted the window and said clear, meaning I guess no one died in it and there's no one in it. And these guys were going to use a pickup truck to pull this car out of the ditch and flip it over. So just to finish this short story, there were people from maybe 12 to 15 people, and I asked who they were, and some were from 4 miles away, some 3 miles away, and we were from a mile away. And the guys were trying to figure out how they're going to pull this car off its roof with a pickup truck. And I said, you guys need any help? No, we're good. And I said, okay. So I started to drive away. I was on the pasture there, and I turned around and I came back. I said, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it looks like it's going to be really hard to do what you're trying to do, because this car is upside down. And it's a narrow dirt road. And I said, I know a guy who's got a backhoe. And it might be easier with the backhoe. What do you think? And they said, well, how much would it cost? And I said, well, I know the guy. I know the guy's got a backhoe, and it's not going to cost anything. And they said, well, okay. So my son and my wife and I got the backhoe, and we got some chains, and we pulled the car, flipped it over, and without damaging it, and got it off the road and into this farmer's field. And here's the point of all this. Sometimes people will take the time to help each other, just sometimes. And it was kind of a heartwarming experience, and I just wanted to share that with you, John.
Well, in the time we have left, because I want to devote next hour to the financial section, because talk about bad news. There's no shortage. There's some things we haven't talked about. Go ahead,
John. We've got David. We've got David on the line. David, welcome.
Yeah. Hi, Vincent and John. I was spurred to call when I heard the earlier caller talking about the disasters, and or was that John that was talking about the magnitude of disasters? Yeah, and
John.
I was reminded then of basically, America's got architectural standards that make these current hurricanes and whatnot less dangerous to us, because we, every city or county, even state, have various architectural standards, and they won't allow us a house to be sold if it's just going to be a flimsy house of sticks, and or a house of straw, so to speak. And of course, that's one of the big scams of 9/11, that those buildings could fall in 10 seconds with just a simple airplane crashing into them. But the idea that now with global warming, we've got new forces of hurricanes. An old hurricane used to be, 75 miles an hour and faster, and we'd get up to maybe 150 miles an hour. But now, in a 250 mile an hour hurricane, which is a Category 5, that used to be once every 20 years. But now we're getting 4 and 5 a year of those Category 5s. And so the architectural standards of America, as well as the world, are going to have to be changed. If we don't hunker down and admit that global warming is happening, we're going to see enormous disasters happening, and the forests of America, or the forests of the world, are going to have to be chopped down in order to rebuild to the old stupid standards, instead of developing new standards which are much stronger and more able to take the brunt of it.
John Regan?
Well, one of the things that's really helped has been the satellite technology, along with the computer modeling, that gives us the lead time for getting people out of the way. And the other side of the Hurricane Matthew story was Haiti, and they're still hurting from the earthquake they had. I don't think the Clinton Foundation did too much good for them there. And we still don't know, and they're saying that could be up to thousands of people died in Haiti because there was no warning that Matthew was coming.
And David, one other point, the images that I saw were some of the hotels that were built with styrofoam screwed onto steel studs. Styrofoam just ripped right off the buildings. And if you go tap on the side of some of these buildings, you'll find that there's a thin veneer of stucco over styrofoam. That's pretty disconcerting to me. David, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for your call. Thank you. John and I will be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Captain John Regan's with us. We are at the financialstateoftheunion.com. We've clicked the news tab, and we're continuing with the educational broadcast. John, please continue.
We're going into the financial section this hour. And
did we lose John Regan?
Can you hear me?
So, John, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, great. Okay, great. All right, John. Glad you're there.
Okay, we're going to hit the financial section this hour, peddling some more fiction, as the resident-in-chief would say. Mm-hmm. First up, Black Eyed Pea closes. It's been a tough time for restaurants, and this one hit close to home, and it was actually one of my favorites to go to back in the days when I could afford to eat out. They had great chicken fried steak, and we're down to just having one in Texas. Apparently there's still a few left in Tennessee and Colorado. But 12 of the 13 remaining Black Eyed Pea restaurants in Texas just closed with no notice, not even to the employees. Unfortunately, we see that happen over and over again, and sometimes the employees don't even get their last paycheck. And just one more of the pieces showing restaurants are having problems, and the situation is not good. The next one, taxes down.
John, before you continue, yes. We've talked about that's what we expect to happen with banks. We expect that you'll go to the bank on Friday, and everything appears to be okay. Monday, you go to the bank, and there's a sign on the door, closed until further notice. That's what we're expecting. And it's pretty disheartening if you're an employee. So as an employee, you're supposed to be loyal to the employers, but they're doing these kinds of things. And at the top of the hour news, there was a piece talking about Sikorsky helicopters, and for 2017, they're looking at a 25% pay cut, for new employees. Interesting. So all is not good. All's not good. Please continue.
Here in Texas, we do not have an income tax, but we do have property taxes and sales taxes. And I was wondering how the sales tax revenue was coming, and just in the nick of time came this article from Wolf Street. And it turns out that the sales tax collections in September for sales that occurred in August dropped 3.5% year over year. And to further compound that, it dropped 3% from 2 years earlier. So more indication that the oil bust is hurting the Texas economy, which was one of the better ones around.
Yeah, here in Springfield, Missouri, they're building restaurant after restaurant after restaurant. And I'm looking at these parking lots, and I don't see a lot of people eating at at these restaurants. I mean, Springfield, Missouri has become a small city of restaurants, banks, churches, and healthcare. That's most of it. And
I was reading an article this morning talking about why restaurants are having problems, and the reasons they gave. One is uncertainty about the elections. Really. Two is that there's too many restaurants, and there may be a good argument for that. But the third one, I just about had to laugh, and that's because grocery store food is so cheap. Have they shopped at their grocery store lately?
John, I got to tell you that I've been buying parts for the farm for years, and they are at the highest prices I've ever seen. Prices for parts and the things that I need to buy are increasing, not decreasing.
And we've talked about pensions quite a bit too. And this is a story out of California, and a fairly small town got a bill for $1.6 million to shore up the pensions for their government retirees. And that's more than the entire budget for the town. So it works out they either have to come up with that, or the pensions get scaled back quite a bit, likely to a level where the people can't afford to live. And I expect to see this in more and more places, because those are the only two options you really have. Is you either have to take more money to fund the pensions, or you have to cut them back. There's not really a middle ground there. And for the public pensions like this, whether it's a state or local pension plan, they probably can't raise the taxes enough to make up the difference. They also have the problem that they can no longer get the 7 to 8% a year they need to get the returns to fund the plan. So if they have to cut back that rate of return, that means they need even more money. Private plans are going to be even worse, because they can't just raise taxes and confiscate money at the point of a gun or threaten you with jail. They would have to do it with increasing prices, and a lot of these companies are in a situation where they're doing everything they can to cut expenses as is. So it may not be a big issue for the election, but we've already seen the cracks forming. And once we get on the other side, as things accelerate, expect to see a lot more of these types of articles.
John, I was traveling through our little hamlet several miles away from our farm. There's only 100 people that live there, and just a few houses. And years ago, there was a problem with a septic system. Most people had septic systems in this little town, and a couple of them weren't doing so well. So how much is a septic system? I don't know, $5,000, $10,000 at the most around here. And it requires a backhoe and a tank and some laterals, and you're good to go. Well, instead of the town saying, you know what, we've got a couple neighbors that have a problem, either they fix it, or if they can't fix it, we'll fix it. We'll just bring in one of our friends with a backhoe and we'll just fix this thing. No, what they did was they took some government money and they built a sewage treatment system. And it was over $1 million, for this little tiny hamlet. And they trenched in these pipes and so forth. Well, I was near the post office. So right behind the post office and right behind the farmer's co-op, there's this sewage treatment system. And it stunk over the weekend. And why am I mentioning that? Because as the supply chain fails, and as chemicals are getting, become in short supply, and maybe when people don't show up to work, or they're not trained, or they get sick, this is what could happen. So why does it smell? I don't know, but it didn't used to smell. So what we did was we took a small problem of a couple septic systems and a couple residences, and we replaced it with a sewage treatment plant that is going to have to be maintained by some employee forever. And I don't think the town thought about that. I offered to be on the water board, and I guess they didn't like that idea, so I'm not on the water board. But John, this is just one tiny example of what we're looking at. One tiny example. So you're right on the money.
And then we turn to what 1% would do. The bond market is in a really tough place. I've seen for sure over $13 trillion in government bonds that are now into the negative arena. I saw a headline, I've not confirmed the number, that said 16 trillion. And based on a footnote at the recent Fed meeting, negative interest rates can come here as well. So if you are holding bonds, I guess the good news is when interest rates go down, bonds go up, and that'd be a good time to sell. But the problem is that the interest rates are too low. They're not realistic compared to the market. And just raising the interest 1% in yields would result in trillions of dollars of losses. And this comes from Bridgewater, which is an investment firm, well respected. And it says that it would be worse than the 1981 bond crash, which I didn't really pay attention to because I don't care about bonds that much, so I kind of ignored them, especially back then. But trillions in losses, and a lot of those bonds are used to fund pension plans. So you'd be looking at trillions of dollars of losses in pension plans, which would make the pension problem even worse.
What's next?
Have a nice day.
Yeah,
but
and we trusted these plans. One of the reasons why we agreed to work wherever we agreed to work was because we thought we had these pension plans. What's next?
The lies are great, but Becky thinks I need to get a happy face T-shirt. It says "Have a nice day."
Where are we going to go when we come back, John?
We're going to talk about the increase in the federal debt.
Okay. More smiles. We'll be right back. Captain John Reagan's with us. John, I've clicked on a story, and it says the story nobody is reporting on.
Well, that's because it's an election year, and people want to get reelected. September 30th was the close of the federal government's accounting year for 2016. And they will gladly release information about the deficit, that's only $600 billion, and say what a good job they're doing on that. But when you turn to what the Treasury Department publishes for the public debt, you get a different picture. Between the end of 2015, September 30th, and the end of 2016, September 30th, the total debt increased by more than $1.4 trillion. That's, these numbers are things that we really don't understand, but it's staggering at how quickly the debt's increasing. We may very well hit more than 20 trillion before we get the new president, whichever it is, installed into office. And you just think about if interest rates start getting close to normal, and let's just use 5% for easy math, 5% of 20 trillion, that's $1 trillion a year just in interest. And that's darn close to the total income taxes brought in. It's
John, I'm
Go
reading the last paragraph of this article on market-ticker.org, market-ticker.org. And it says, and this is a quote. This is from the article, last paragraph. Quote, "Let me be clear. On the arithmetic, if we do not stop this now within the next 4 to 5 years, that is, within the next presidential term, our government will collapse. Our economy will collapse. Our healthcare system will collapse. And both the stock and housing markets will collapse. This is not politics. It's arithmetic. And the worst part of it is that I am utterly certain that the references count, along with the views count on this article, will both be a fraction of the politically oriented articles I've recently posted. It says that the real end of our way of life in America, a threat that is obvious, mathematically certain, not very far in the future, and yet avoidable if we act now, fails to garner any sort of serious attention, is the real outrage, folks." End quote.
I agree with most of that, except that it is not avoidable. Just the Social Security and Medicare problems cannot be fixed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it was avoidable at one time, but is not any longer avoidable, right? Mm-hmm. Very, very sad commentary on what we've allowed to happen. And I still say the same thing, John. To me, it's the sum of all individual greed. That's what this is, the sum of all individual greed. How much do people need? And you look at, and as you were saying this, I was thinking about the alleged debates last night. Hillary Clinton, she's proud of her 30 years of public service. That's what public service. That's what they call us, public service. They act like they're doing us a favor. They're raping, they're pillaging, they're plundering, they're parasites. And I look at the pollution that's all over in our village and surrounding village. And there are these signs that say, "Hey, I need a job. Give me a job. Re-elect me." Class, never re-elect anyone. Never re-elect anyone. Captain John Regan, I'll be right back. Class, if you'd like to go to the website, thefinancialstateoftheunion.com, and please click on the news tab. Captain John Regan, U.S. Air Force Reserves, retired, is with us every Monday. John, please continue.
And if you think the federal debt's bad, well, just for the United States, total debt is now up to $66 trillion. And then we've got this article, World Debt Is, and this is a report, information release from the International Monetary Fund, and the article was from the Daily Mail. World debt is now $152 trillion, and that doesn't even include the financial services debt or financial sector. We've got McKinsey saying world debt's $200 trillion. Another company said that it's actually $300 trillion. I'm not sure anybody knows for sure, but to have this published by the IMF, just stop and think about the way debt works is when a loan is created, there's only one of two outcomes. It's either paid off or it's defaulted. There's no other options. And we're getting to the point where a lot of that debt is going to have to be defaulted on. 152 trillion, a number way beyond what any of us can imagine. The lifestyle, let me use the air quotes here, prosperity that we experience in the world today is only because we've mortgaged our future to the tune of $152 trillion. One of the things that is lacking in our education is financial education. And I've said before, we get a poor financial education even at the graduate level. When you incur that debt, you really need to be sure that it's worthwhile because you're sacrificing your future in order to go into debt now for whatever it is you're buying. And while it might be nice now to have that increase in lifestyle, when you get later on and maybe that job you were counting on having went away, maybe that pension you were counting on having went away, you'll be in a worse situation than what you were planning on. And this is just another piece showing that we're getting pretty far down the road and we're running out of road to kick the can down.
John, I was thinking about, as you were saying this, I was thinking about the course that we used to teach in most high schools called home economics. And it was really not for everybody, at least the administrations thought that it wasn't for everybody. And it was for mostly young women who, were going to be homemakers. And I approached the superintendent when I was teaching in the high school level back in the 90s. I said, I'd like to rewrite the curriculum for the school. And I would like to include the principles of finance, economics, banking, insurance, and I listed them off for every student. Every student, this is a required part of the high school education. Every student will take principles of banking, finance, insurance, and so forth. And I was told by the superintendent, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. There's a state plan, and that's what we teach. We teach the state plan. So we don't teach every student the principles of finance, economics, and insurance. And it's an outrage. It's an outrage because so many young people will go out and they will say, well, hey, no money down, no interest. This is like free. And that's one of the reasons we got into this mess, John. And contracts, principles of business, How do contracts work? We don't teach that. But we do teach specialized history classes for different groups of people. We need to teach everybody history, and we need to teach everybody principles of finance, economics, insurance, banking, contracts, and more. Because who doesn't get involved with those things? We all do. We all do. And small mistakes can really be very costly later on. We can destroy our credit rating. And when we do that, our cost of insurance goes up. It's frustrating. It really is. What's next?
Well,
talk about trucks?
Okay. I slipped in a relatively good news before
really?
the finale here.
Okay.
Heavy truck orders plunge. The worst September since 2009. The the sales plunged 27% in September. It's just another indication that the transportation sector is having problems. It's trucks, it's rail, it's shipping. I even saw an article where Kawasaki is looking at possibly getting out of the shipbuilding business. And I go back to high school. When I was a junior, I was treasurer of my junior achievement company. And I learned about how to calculate break-even points. And you've got certain fixed costs, you've got certain variable costs, and then you've got sales. And when you cut back sales 27%, that's pretty darn serious. And I don't know how long some of these companies will be able to keep their doors open. We've already seen some surprise bankruptcies, and I expect to see more. It's not that we're going into the Depression. The Depression is already here. It's been covered up by trillions of fake dollars going into the market to make things appear to be somewhat normal. And perhaps those of us that survive and look at history will determine, where did it start? You could make a case that it was the 2008 crisis, maybe even going back to 2000 when the dot-com bubble burst. But as far as the Depression goes, you're living in it, and time is getting shorter and shorter for whatever you want to do before that last illusion of normalcy disappears. And the next article we're going to get to is the central bank expiration dates.
John, I was just one comment. I was at a auto salvage yard in the last several days. You're talking about illusions. And I was looking at these vehicles that were all banged up. You can buy parts from wrecked vehicles. I was just looking at some of the damage to these vehicles. And what I noticed was, when you talk about illusion, there's an illusion that you have a bumper on the front and back of your vehicle. And it's this little plastic thing. But if you look under that bumper, you will see, styrofoam. I'm not exaggerating. Styrofoam. And past the styrofoam is the car. So if you think you can tap somebody and not have a lot of damage, that's not true. That's not true. You're going to have a lot of damage. That plastic bumper is $400 or $500. It's not even a bumper. It's a plastic covering over what used to be a bumper in that spot. So in that spot, you don't have a bumper. You have a piece of styrofoam or a couple blocks of styrofoam. And I'm talking about even big cars like Crown Victorias. They have blocks of styrofoam or these honeycombs, if you will, of plastic. There's not much there. If you think there's metal there, you're mistaken. And I was going to push you're going to work on an engine on a 2000 Mercedes. I'm going to push it into the shop. And I was going to get a small tractor, a 20 horsepower tractor, and kind of put a tire on the front of it, a tire knot on a rim, and use that as a cushion. Can't do that. I'll damage what looks like a bumper. There's no bumper there. It's a piece of plastic. It's a skin. It's for aesthetics. It's not for crashworthiness. And that's just part of this illusion, John. And what I'd like to see is, show me an automobile, a car that has a metal bumper. I'd like to see one. Maybe there are some. I just haven't seen them. But I don't think so. Some trucks have these things that look like they're chrome plated, and they look like bumpers. But each time I look at one, they seem to have less and less and less and less metal, and more plastic on these alleged bumpers. Well, please continue.
Well, that brings to mind, there's a truck commercial that I've seen where they drop a toolbox into the bed of one of these new trucks that's built with aluminum thanks to the new fuel standards, and it just punches a hole in the bed. And they take the other brand being advertised and drop the toolbox in, and you just get a dent.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, class, here's the takeaway from this. As you travel and you look at little dents in cars, look at how much damage, you see in the sides of these vehicles, or the fronts, or the hoods, or the trunk lids. Look at the damage that you see in the quarter panels, and then try to imagine what caused that. You'll see like a massive wrinkle. And just think, did somebody lean against it? I mean, exactly what happened to cause that amount of damage? And in the older cars, we didn't have so much damage from slight impacts or slight pushes or slight nudges. Now, we've got massive impacts. I put a set of shock absorbers on a Jeep over the weekend, front shock absorbers. I compared them to the original equipment. The original equipment made 21 years ago. Everything was lighter on the new shocks. Everything, including the hardware to install it. We'll be right back. Hey, John, I can't believe it. We've broken the top 20 on TalkStream Live. Well done. By the way, 70% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. 34% of Americans have no savings. That's the America Hillary Clinton is proud of, with all of her accomplishments over the last 30 years in what she calls public service. John, please continue.
Now, we've talked about the model I created and presented at the last Get Prepares Expo, just taking the debt service and government spending, comparing it to total income, and finding out that those two items eclipse total income by 2020. So that's a guide we can use. And I came across this one that I call Central Bank Expiration Dates. The article's entitled Bridgewater Calculates How Much Time Central Banks Have Left. And Bridgewater is an investment firm. I believe they manage about $150 billion, so they're a pretty well-respected firm out there. And if you scroll down, when you get to the last images that's titled Central Banks Will Reach Their Limits, and go back up 2 paragraphs. From the charts below, we see that the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan, which are the 2 central banks that are most actively monetizing debt, have 8 and 26 months respectively. So 8 months for the European Bank, 26 for Bank of Japan. If they back off on this, then the European Bank could possibly last 5.5 years, and Bank of Japan 4 years. So if you think that the problem can be kicked down the road and you might make it another 10, 15, 20 years, this is just another factor showing that's not the case. The central banks will no longer be able to pull a rabbit out of their hat and make the illusion go on. But before these central banks have problems, for example, let's look at Europe, and I had a couple of articles in the employment section, 2 of the European banks slashing thousands of jobs. The banking sector in Europe is in bad shape, and if they start collapsing, then that contagion can go worldwide, much as we saw with some of the problems we have with the banks here in 2008. And a lot of made-up money went into making things appear maybe not normal, but at least acceptable. And here we are with in more debt, in a worse position, and the pressure cooker is just getting ready to exceed its limits. And when that happens, it's going to be a ride that we've never experienced in the history of man. Vincent?
John, what comes to mind is what we used to do. We used to think of our wealth individually or as a family based on the number of digits that were accumulated in the bank, and we'd look at the banking statements, the saving statements, and so forth, and say, wow, it's increasing, But so that was wealth. I got to tell you that the instructors that I'm talking to off the air are are concerned about those digits evaporating. And what they're doing is they are buying the things that they need because they're concerned about the ability to get them in the future. And if you have time, if you talk about radiation this week, you'll see why.
And we've seen, the counts per minute, over 1,000, approaching 2,000. We've got, it was 1,700.
1,795 in Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Yeah.
1,795 in Idaho Falls, Idaho. Almost that much in Louisville, Kentucky. Denver, Colorado, almost that much. Same in Portland, Maine. Colorado Springs, the same in Champaign, or 1,537 in Champaign, Illinois. It's high in cities all over the country. And John, these numbers, I believe, are higher than we've ever reported. Correct me if I'm wrong. These are the highest numbers we've seen, yes?
Pretty close to it. I've seen a few reports that were over 2,000.
Okay. These are high class. These are really, really high numbers. John Regan, thank you so much for being with us, class. Above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you. Class.